Sure, I'm going to cover some additional things you guys can learn in Rails after the class. Most of the things I'm going to cover, while I'm covering them in the context of Rails, they're generally applicable for web applications in general. So, for instance, if you wanted to specialize in Python a little bit more, you could find the equivalent in Python and just learn it there instead. Okay, so these are all just general, more advanced things that you can cover, and that I would. They're a little niche in some ways, so it really just kind of depends on what application you want to build. But at least some of them are like a little niche, and some of them are just kind of more general. That as you become a more advanced developer, you'll want to understand some of these things. Okay, so I'm just gonna start from the top. I've not really organized it in terms of like a priority. I think in terms of which one you would want to learn, I think it just really depends on your interest, and you should probably just pick whichever one you're most interested in doing. So they're not organized in any way. They're just kind of listed in however I came up with them, basically. Okay, so the first one is background jobs. So the idea with background jobs is that right now, when you're running all your processes, they're not running asynchronously. If you have to process a bunch of data, such as like if you were to load in a CSV file, and there's other gems for like importing CSVs, then all of that would have to get fully processed before the user is able to, the web application is able to redirect your user to another page, and it has to basically use all the processing power to do so. So when you create background jobs, you're spinning off these separate processes in the background, okay, and you give them these tasks, okay, and the processes are called like background job workers or something like that, and they basically, you can give them the task to like work through these different processes on like a separate thread so that it's not slowing down the rest of your application. You can do a lot of other things with this. You can set up like priority queues so that you take care of the most important tasks first by assigning different priorities to them, as well as scheduling them for like certain times of the day or like at certain like intervals and stuff like that. Okay, so this is, at this point, you guys have not worked with enough data that like you really need this yet. But if you were to generate a lot more data, and if you had like a bigger scale web application, then this is something you would want to do for performance reasons. Okay, so examples of times you might do it is if you have like a lot of users, right? If you want to send out all the emails, you don't want your Rails app just like sitting there processing all the emails while like nothing else is able to hit the server, right? So you stick it on a background job or like multiple background tasks, so that it can process while your Rails app is still able to serve incoming requests. Okay. Similarly, CSV import. If you're importing like a lot of data and you have a lot of like number crunching and data processing to do, you don't want to wait till all the data has finished processing before you allow the user to do something else. Okay. So this is just something you can look into. There's a lot of different gems available for it. Oscar recommended this one for me, Rufus Scheduler. I've not used it, but he told me it's relatively easy to use. Okay, so you might look into it. There's also quite a few that are mentioned on the Rails guides here. Okay, and things like rescue and delayed jobs and Sidekick and all this kind of stuff. And there's some differences, so you can just kind of look into that. Okay, and again, I'm sure other platforms like Python have something similar as well if you want to do it. There's also Rails form helpers. You guys have probably seen this. This is just Rails' way of setting up forms. They can set up forms a little bit more efficiently, but then you're also sort of like pigeonholed into that specific sort of syntax. The forms are set up around like a specific object, so it makes it easier to pass to the controllers. However, if you need to expand it for other reasons, then you may have to end fighting a little bit. But it is very common for Rails developers to use form helpers, so it may be worth learning if you want to target a Rails job specifically. Okay, this one specifically is, I would say, very Rails centric. So if you're not targeting Rails, it may not be worth your time to learn Rails form helpers. Yeah. There's also partials. We cover this a little bit in layouts as well. This is just ways to reuse certain fragments of your code. So you don't have to retype the same fragments. You can just like put those partials snippets into certain files and then load them in from those certain files. You can also pass in data through the partials, like specific objects, so that they're reusable. So you can use the same partial for like different types of objects as well. So you just have to set that up. You can go more in depth into that. You would want to be using form helpers before you use partials, probably. At least that's the typical way. I think you can implement it without form helpers, but if you're going to go to the trouble of doing partials, you probably want to learn form helpers, at least within the context of Rails. There's also caching. So caching is very important for a large-scale web application in general. Basically, right now, if someone hits like a products page or a user's index page, Rails is having to regenerate that HTML file every time someone hits that page, right? You're going to the database, you're making a SQL query call, you're grabbing all the user objects or possibly like joined objects, and then you're processing it to like create the HTML file for each of those lines of code that you're displaying that text, right? So if your products page or your users page is not changing that often, it makes sense to just save that HTML file and then pass that to any other requests that are calling the same page. So that like if I at my computer am requesting the same products page as Somya, and Sean is also requesting the same products page, rather than having Rails need to process that page 3 different times, it processes it once, it creates a cache of that page, and then it can just serve up that already processed page to all the other users. And then if your page changes for some reason, like a new product is added, it's considered breaking the cache, okay? And then the next time someone requests that page, then a new page is generated and a new page is put into your cache. Okay, so it optimizes it when you start having a lot of different requests and speeds up that process. You can do this for an entire page, which is like a full page cache, as well as for like partials and snippets of the page. Okay, so that if only a certain portion of your page, like the cache breaks, then you don't have to throw away the entire thing. You don't have to always necessarily reprocess everything. Okay, so there's just different ways of sort of breaking that down according to how likely you are to break that cache. Okay. These are some popular gems. Paperclip is on the platform. It's just a way of managing your images and your attachments. I think you can like resize your thumbnails and things like that. Elasticsearch is a search engine. Elasticsearch is very deep. Okay, so there's the sort of like the surface things of just getting some things that work in Elasticsearch, as well as like a lot of other like more advanced features. So you can go pretty deep into all of these. I don't recommend you learn everything on this list. It's just like you just pick what you're most interested in, especially if you have like a project you want to work with it. Okay. Caching is a little bit more of a general, more foundational kind of thing. Twilio is for text messaging. Devise is a gem for login and authentication. It provides a lot of your login authentication functionality for you beyond what Bcrypt does. Things like connecting it to like emails, being able to like reset passwords, like through an email, a lot of other things. You can pick out which functionalities within Devise you want. I will warn you that it is quite a bit more complicated than Bcrypt. So it may take some setup to get working. Okay. Monologue I've not worked with, but Oscar tells me it's good for blogging. So if you wanted to build a blog, you might look into it. There's also a concept called eager and lazy loading. Okay, and this is also a general concept. Right now, when you make SQL queries, Rails does something called lazy loading. And what that means is that if you are grabbing, say, all the users, okay, and you're passing that into a view, and in the view, you then have a for loop where you're iterating through each user. And then on each user object, let's say you're calling the users like blogs or messages, then every time you loop through, Rails is at that point making a separate query to the database to grab the blog and the post content. Okay, so that means that for every time you loop through a user, Rails is making a separate query, right? So if you have like 1,000 users, you're making 1,000 queries, right? That's not going to be as efficient as making one query up front that is larger, that grabs all the data for you, because you have to make that back and forth transaction multiple times. So, but it's set up to do that, set up by default to do that, which is lazy loading. And if you do eager loading, you can grab all of that data up front so that you can process through it in a faster way, okay, without having to process as much data. So all this is like for scale, basically. This is a tutorial online that I found. It looks reasonably good for explaining how eager and lazy loading works and how to implement it. There's also a concept called modules with namespacing and mixins. So modules are very similar to classes. Right now you guys are using classes to organize your methods. You can also organize your methods in a module, which is kind of like a light version of a class. It's basically just a naming convention. We call it a namespace for scoping your methods. So you organize your methods within a module, and then by having it be a module rather than a class, you can actually tie it into multiple classes. Okay, so you kind of create a little like mini library for yourself by having it in this module, and then you can use like include module name. And then like if you have multiple classes that are not inheriting from each other, right? So they don't automatically have each other's methods, you can include it in the module so that, and include the module so that you can use those methods in those different places, okay? And so this is a general way that a lot of platforms do it to be able to provide that accessibility without having to rewrite the method. You want to be careful about using modules because you don't, when something should be inheriting, right, you want to use the traditional inheritance path to provide your methods rather than using modules if you don't need it. Okay, so just be smart about when you're using the modules and when you actually need it. Rails doesn't do this, but there's also a concept called multiple inheritance, where a class can inherit from many different classes to get the methods from all those different classes, okay? And modules is kind of Rails' solution to multiple inheritance, which is something that is available in some other languages, okay? So because it provides a lot of the similar functionality. So that like mixing in of the different methods to different classes using modules is called mixins. So that's why modules have like two functions, one for namespacing the methods, and the second one for allowing you to mix it into different classes. And it's okay if like I'm covering a lot like really fast, so it's okay if you're not like absorbing all of it. This is I have my notes here. I'm going to send it out. You guys can just read it over to get like a brief overview, and then if you want to learn more about it, you just have to Google and learn more about it separately. Okay, and then actually that's it. Okay, that's the entire list. Does anyone have any questions on my blitz of other things to learn? Yeah. Not really about